to the second question. When you go to the second question, was it attached by the owner of the property? You only ask this question if the answer to the first question was what?
Yes.
Yes. You only bother to ask this question at all if the answer to the first question was yes. If the first question is yes, it's permanently attached. Then you go to the second question. Was it attached by the owner? Who else could have attached this thing?
Tenant.
A leaser.
A tenant. That's right, a lessee. A tenant could have attached this thing. If a tenant attached it, the answer to the question of was it attached by the owner is no. Then it's still what kind of property?
Personal
Property. So the only way something can be considered a fixture is if it is permanently attached and it was attached by who?
The owner.
property owner.
The owner of the property. So here, from a practical standpoint, let me warn you about something. If you're showing a property that's currently tenant occupied, what do you think one of the questions you should ask before your buyer makes an offer on that property? What do you think one of those questions should be?
What items are the tenants, and like what is their personal property that they will be taking out?
Yes. Are there any things attached in here that were attached by the tenant? I'll give you a perfect example. What if the tenant put up ceiling fans in all the rooms? Well, buyer buys the property. When the tenant moves out, what can they do with those ceiling fans?
They get to
They
take
can
them.
They can take them with them because they're the personal property of the tenant. Does everybody follow me on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's your test for determining if something is a fixture or not. Now, we talked a little bit already about the idea of the manufactured home. And we said these were personal property unless they have been converted into real property. Now that's manufactured homes, single wide, double wide, and obviously depending on where you are in the state, this may be more prevalent. I'm from the eastern part of the state. There are a lot of manufactured homes. Those are different than modular homes. This is a slide where you might see a couple questions. Let me tell you what's going to be important here about manufactured homes. When you talk about manufactured homes, okay, right here, what's the first thing that should come to mind? What kind of property are they?
Personal.
Trailers.
They are personal property. Unless you have taken the steps to convert them, they are personal property. Another thing to remember about a manufactured home is they do not have to comply with your local building codes. Look at that. They do not have to comply with your local building codes. There is a national standard for them, which is much less strict than your normal local building codes are. And so basically these homes are allowed to exist in what your city or county would consider an unsafe manner because they're not required to meet those minimum safety standards. That is very different from this type of housing. Modular housing. Modular housing are homes that are built in a factory and then assembled on site. The difference, there are a couple differences between a manufactured home and a modular home. A manufactured home has a chassis, a metal frame, and that stays there. Even once you put it on a permanent foundation, that metal frame has to stay there because that's the primary support for the property. A modular home is put on a foundation. That's the only support it has. Once it is put on that foundation, it is automatically what kind of property? Personal or real?
Real.
Modular homes are considered real property from the moment they are installed. And if you notice, the other huge difference here is it what? Does meet your local building codes. So even here's an example. Let's say that Michelle lives in Holly Springs and she wants to put a modular home on a piece of property she owns. When she contacts the modular home company, and let's say they're located in Arkansas, they're going to build the house in Arkansas. The first thing they're going to ask her is where she wants the home located. Now that's not for shipping. They don't really care about that. They'll figure that part out later. Why do you think they're gonna ask her first and foremost where the home is gonna be located?
Local building.
Building codes.
They gotta make sure to get a copy of the local building codes, because even though that house is gonna be built in a factory in Arkansas, it has to comply with Holly Springs, North Carolina's building codes. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
So when she calls to order that house, they're gonna have to get the copy of the local building code and make sure they build the house to meet those building codes, because it's gonna go through the same permitting and inspection process that any other site-built home would. Okay, that's the big difference between modular homes and manufactured homes. Manufactured obviously can be converted into real property, because you can take any personal property and convert it to real property by permanently attaching it. And these are those 3 steps that we talked about earlier, to remove the wheels and axles, attach it to a permanent foundation, and then turn in the title to the Department of Motor Vehicles. These things actually have a VIN. They have a vehicle identification number from the North Carolina Department of Transportation, because they are mobile homes. So one of the things you have to do is notify the North Carolina Department of Transportation and the Department of Motor Vehicles, and this is no longer a motor vehicle. This is now real property. But those are the 3 steps to convert a manufactured home. And so the first thing I would always do, and this will not show up on the test, this next little tidbit, everything else I've said mine, but this little tidbit, if you're making an offer on a piece of land that's got a manufactured home on it, go look at the property tax records. If you pull the property tax records and you click on structure and you don't see anything listed, what kind of property is that thing? Is it real property or personal?
Personal.
It's personal. If you click on it and you see a structure listed, it's been converted to real property.
Mm-hmm.
That's the easiest way to tell. And it doesn't mean you can't sell it if it's personal property. Just make sure, if it's personal property and you want it included, where had you better put that?
In the contract.
In the contract.
Contract. Make sure that contract is clear that we're including this manufactured home. Is everybody all right with that?
I have a question.
Okay,
So
good luck.
let's say that the owner has already made it into real property, but they haven't contacted the DMV. So let's say they're putting it up for sale, and it's technically, they think it's real property, but according to the DMV, it's still personal property. What do you do?
Then you treat it like it's personal. So
And that was the issue that I was having.
Yeah.
Because the county did not want to recognize them, both of the properties that I have, as real property.
Yeah.
Even though DMV
said it is.
But it's kind of a win-win, because you have a lower tax break when you do your taxes on it, though.
Yeah.
Right, that's correct.
Exactly. And so what is it? Is it Tasha or Tasho?
It's Tasha.
Is it Tasha? Okay, I'm sorry.
It's spelled different. That's why I just put my first initial.
No, I mangled that. I'm so sorry, Tasha. I won't.
No, you're fine.
So Tasha, honestly, from your perspective, you've done everything you can do. What I would just make sure of is, if you ever do sell one of those properties, make sure to, write in the manufactured home as, the personal property, because that'll make sure it's covered. It makes it crystal clear that you intend to include that with the property.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
That's what I would do. Okay. We talked about modulars. I can skip over that. Let's talk about plants. Let's talk about the outside. We're all cooped up inside. Why are y'all all inside? I know why I'm inside, because I'm having to broadcast from 15 different computers here, but y'all can be outside and it's too hot.
My upstairs neighbors are moving, so it's not ideal for me to be outside.
It's hot out.
It is hot. It's
Wearing up outside.
my dogs look at me like they have a dog door, and they're like, "Can you close that? Because there's hot air coming in." I have one dog who thinks it's his job to stand with his head out the dog door. So his butt apparently likes to be air conditioned, but his head out the door. I'm like, buddy, this is not cool. It was air conditioning the whole world. In or out, pick one. Plants can either be real property or personal property as well. Even plants. And I know that sounds confusing because we said one of the tests of is something permanently attached. What did I say? Nailed, screwed, glued, or what?
In the ground.
Buried in the
Buried in the
ground.
ground.
So that seems to be a little bit confusing. Let me tell you what the differentiation is going to be here. If it's a plant that you have to plant year after year after year, it doesn't come back on its own, then it's personal property. Even if it's buried, if it has to be, so corn, you got a garden out there. You're selling your property and you got a 2-acre garden and it's full of corn and beans and tomatoes and everything out there. Do those plants come back year after year? I know I'm testing some.
No.
They do not. They have to be what?
Replanted.
Every single year. Here's what the law says about those plants. They are personal property. Because they have to be cultivated every single year, they are personal property. Whereas those like on this screen right here, because they do come back every year, are considered real property. Bushes, shrubs, trees, all of those are real property. Now, why is that important? Because, as we said earlier, when you're selling a piece of land, we're including all of the real property, but we're not including the what?
Personal.
The personal property. So if I sell that property that has this 2-acre garden on it, assuming the contract doesn't mention anything about the garden, just assume for a second the contract doesn't say anything about the garden. Who owns the plants in the garden after the day of closing? The seller or the buyer?
The seller.
The seller does. The seller does, because they were personal property and they belong to what?
The seller.
The seller.
Seller.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Look at this last bullet point right here. Because normally when we think of personal property, we say, well, yeah, it's yours, but you got to do what with it before we close?
Take it with you.
Take it with you. What does this say about this kind of personal property?
They don't need to take it with them. They can continue until they gotten all that they need from it.
That's exactly right. They don't have to take those plants with them. They can leave them there, and the new owner has to not only allow them to stay there, but has to allow the person who planted them to re-enter the property so they can tend to that crop and they can harvest that crop. So let me ask you a question. If you were selling a property with a big 2-acre garden on it, do you think that would present an issue right there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So here's what I would recommend. Include the garden, the crops, as personal property in the contract. Wouldn't that be the cleanest way to do it? To write in the contract that the plants in the garden are conveying to the buyer as personal property. Would that be the easiest way to handle it?
Yes.
Because then because otherwise, here's what's going to happen. A month after closing, here comes Mr. Seller back in there on his tractor, and he's going to dig up the potatoes in the garden. And the buyer's out there having a fit because he thinks somebody's doing what?
Trespassing.
Robbing them.
And now you're going to have to try to explain, oh, well, no, he's got the legal right to come back on this property, and you're going to get shot. Don't do that, right? Don't create that kind of a mess. And let me tell you how this is also a mess. Even more important, if you're selling farmland is real estate, is it not?
Yeah, it is.
If you ever get into practice of selling farmland, it would not be advisable to close
Till after harvest.
until after the harvest.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you sold that farm and you didn't write in the contract what was going to happen with the crops would still belong to the one who planted them, and they'd have the right to come back on the farm to continue to tend them and to harvest them. Somebody's going to be mad. Real big mad, as the expression goes.
Especially if you're in North Carolina.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So don't create that kind of a situation for yourself.
So does that just mean like after one harvest and then it's done? Because you know how sometimes, people will plant things and then like the next year, like tomatoes or potatoes will grow in its spot from the same plant because something like died off and is in there. Can the seller still? go back?
That's a different plant though. It might sprout out of something, like the fruit fell on the ground and the seed therefore germinated, but that's a different plant. So no, just the one harvest. Yeah. Okay. So that is fixtures.
Can you set a timeline in the contract saying like they have until the harvest is over and then, then it's completely done and they can't come back?
You could, but the cleaner way to do it would just be to either delay the closing until after the harvest,
Right.
or sell the crops with the land, right? Just have the purchaser. If I was selling farmland and a purchaser came to me and said, I want to close today, and I said, well, we got 100 acres of tobacco out here, and they said, well, we need to close by the end of this month. Maybe they've got some tax implications and they need to close in a hurry. I would say to them, okay, well then we need to figure out what is the value of the 100 acres of tobacco, and we need to add that in as personal property to the transaction, because otherwise you'd just be creating a nightmare for yourself.
Okay.
Okay. We all good with fixtures? Remember, on a test and in real life, whenever you see a question about is it a fixture, what's the first place you're going to look?
Contract.
In the contract. What does the contract say? Now, if the contract doesn't say anything, then you go to the rules about is it attached and who did the attaching. Okay? Y'all give me a thumbs up. We good there? Feel good?
I have one question about the fixtures.
Okay, go for it.
As far as the test, do we need to know the IRMA, or?
If you know my 2 questions, you'll be fine on the test.
Okay.
Now, one thing I will point out, and I don't think they would ever test you on this, but this is just for practical knowledge. If something, I call them accessories. If there are accessories that go with something that's a fixture, then the accessories are also a fixture. Let me give you an example of what I mean.
Like the garage door opener.
The garage door opener. Exactly. The garage door, the motor is clearly a fixture. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And because the remotes go to that particular garage door opener, even though the remotes aren't attached, they are also part of the fixture. The same thing is true of the keys to the door. Well, clearly the keys are not attached to the property, but the keys are a fixture because the door lock cannot be operated without the keys. Is everybody okay on that?
Yeah.
We've had people try to take pool pumps. Like, number one, it was attached. Number two, the pool is a fixture, so therefore the accessories that go with the pool are also a fixture. Okay.
I have one thing. So I used to work at a law firm, and part of the firm dealt with property tax, and they went through a bar who ended up going and selling the bar to a different individual. They actually had to take all of the liquor out of the bar since it was personal property, and I guess like, what is the word?
They probably
put in an application for it. They had to put in an application for it to see if they could keep it.
Yeah, that has to do with ABC law in North Carolina. Yeah. Alcohol laws.
You can spell that way.
Yeah. They were written sometime in the 1600s, the alcohol laws in this state. We're the most backward state in the country when it comes to dealing with, trust me, my family owned a bar. It's unbelievable. I'll give you an example of how crazy the alcohol laws are in the state, for those of you that don't know. In every other business, the more you buy of something, what happens to the price? The cheaper it gets, right? Do you know that your bars pay more per bottle than you pay for alcohol?
Mixed beverage tax.
Because they tack a mixed beverage tax.
$3.75 per bottle.
$3.75 per bottle on top of the full retail price, and then they charge taxes again on every individual drink that's sold out. It's insane. It's insane. So when you go to a bar and you wonder why a drink costs $10, because 8 of it's going to the state of North Carolina.
Yep.
It's so crazy. All right, now I liked y'all all morning and you liked me, but that's all about change. I just hate change.
I had one question
Okay, Courtney.
What was, you said there were 2 questions we had to, you were trying to tell us for the test that we need to know?
You talk about decide if something's a fixture?
Yes. Yes, what were the 2 questions again, if you don't mind?
They are right there on your screen right now.
Oh, hold on.
Is it permanently attached, and was it attached by the owner of the property? Those are the questions you need to ask yourself if you're trying to determine if something's a fixture.
Okay. I
Okay?
just didn't know if I heard correctly.
No problem.
Yep, thank you.
No problem. So let's talk about something that will truly, and I hate to lay this on you at the end of the day, but it's just the way the timing works out. Your brains are going to melt and run out of your ears for the rest of today. Because up to this point, you lived in a world where you thought that ownership was a very simple thing. He owns it. How complex can that be? What if I were to tell you that there are 7 different ways that you can have ownership of property by yourself? Just one person could own property in one of 7 ways. And what if I told you that when you have more than one owner, there are 3 different types of relationships you could have with the other owner. And you and the other owner could own the property in any one of those 7 ways. Now, y'all are a smart group. I bet you can do multiplication. What's 7 times 3?
21.
So you walked into this class this morning thinking, oh, I own property. That makes sense. There's one way to own property. I'm here to tell you there's not one way to own property. There are
21.
21 different ways that property can be owned. And guess how many of them you're expected to know for the test?
21.
Blackjack, baby. All 21 of them. Now, thankfully, they are mostly repetitive. If you understand the 7 different types of ownership, then you can just pair them up with the other, understand these 3 categories and these 7 categories, and you just start this one and this one and this one and that one. There's not like 21 distinct ones. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds. But it is complex to understand the different types of ownership. So first of all, let's give you a vocabulary word. An estate, really important vocabulary word. Probably going to see it on the national section of the test. This word will pop up. And it probably will be a definitional question. So you shouldn't miss the definitional questions. Those are the easy ones. You don't have to dig and think and logic your way through it. But what is an estate? An estate, it's not a big fancy house out in the country. That's one use of the word, but that's not how we use it in this class. An estate is any legal interest that you have in a property. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean there. Is ownership a legal interest in a property?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It is. So would it be accurate to say then that I own my house, therefore I have an estate, I have an ownership estate in my house? Do you think that would be an accurate statement?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is leasing a legal relationship to a property?
Yes.
Yes. And it says here that any legal interest is a what?
Estate.
An estate. So could a leasehold be an estate? Could a lease be an estate?
Yes.
Yes. I am scheduled to inherit a property. I am the known heir of a property. Is that a legal interest in the property?
Yes.
Yes. So therefore I have a what?
And
An estate.
An estate in the property. Here's what I'm trying to point out to you. There are a lot of different ways you can have an estate in a property. If you look at a piece of property and say, oh yeah, Well, and you have some relationship to that property, then you have some type of an estate in that property. But if you look at a piece of property and go, that ain't got nothing to do with me, then you don't have a what?
An estate.
You don't have an estate. If you have any relationship legally to that property, you have an estate in the property. Everybody all right with that definition?
Yes.
So there are ownership estates, there are lease estates, there are inheritance estates. There's all these different kinds of potential legal relationships to a property. But the two big categories are this: I own it or I lease it. Now we use a fancy terminology to refer to that. Ownership is called freehold interest, a freehold estate or a freehold interest. Freehold means what?
I own it.
I own it. I have some type of ownership. Maybe I own it by myself. Maybe I own it with other people. Maybe I own it for a limited amount of time, but I can use the word what? If I see freehold, I know I can use the word what?
Oh,
Own. I own it. Not only is it an estate, but it's an estate where I own the thing. That's a freehold estate. And here's why that's important. If I own it, I can do what with it?
Sell anything I want.
I can sell it. If I own it, remember the one distinguishing characteristic about an owner is that they can sell it. A freehold estate can be sold. And I'm free to hold it or free to do what with it?
Sell it.
There you go. That's what freehold means. Non-freehold is an estate where you might have a lot of rights and privileges, but you don't have what?
The right to sell.
I have disposition. You don't have ownership. You don't have the right of disposition. Does everybody follow me on, connecting the dots there? So when you see the word freehold on the test, all they're telling you is this person what?
They owns it.
They own that piece of land. They have some type of ownership. Remember, we said there's 21 types of ownership. So there's a lot of possibilities, but we know it's ownership. We know as fact they don't lease it. Because if they leased it, it would be called non-freehold. Everybody okay with that? Yep. So we're going to focus in this chapter, because this chapter is all about ownership. We're going to focus on the freehold ownership. Look at this chart. Don't it look pretty?
Ew.
Isn't it beautiful down there? This, by the way, are all the different types of freehold ownership. All the different types of freehold ownership, meaning I own the property, are right here. Hopefully, by the time we get to the end of today, this is going to make more sense to you than it, I'm guessing this doesn't make much sense when you look at it right now, right? You look at that and you're like, what the heck am I looking at? Hopefully, we'll clear some of that up. Because not all of these forms of ownership are created the same. Even if you have 7 children, you might love them all, but do you like one the best? Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Yes, you do. There's always a favorite, right? So when we talk about ownership, let's talk about, and we're going to work our way from the favorite down. Let's focus on first what we got when we have ownership. It says here there are many types of ownership. When a property's sold, it says the seller is the what?
Grantor.
Grantor, and the buyer is the what?
Grantee.
And by the way, that is also true when the property is a gift. Even if there's not a sale, if it's a gift, it's still grantor, grantee. Okay, anytime ownership is being transferred. The grantee is not driving the bus. What does it say on that third bullet point? The grantee gets what?
Whatever type of ownership the grantor transfers to them.
Whatever type of ownership the grantor transfers over to them. Now the grantor can be real nice and transfer everything they've got. So if the grantor has unlimited ownership, what could they transfer?
Unlimited.
Unlimited ownership. Could they transfer less than unlimited ownership?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they can always go which direction?
Down.
Smaller.
Down, worse. They can always give you worse than what they got. They can't give you what?
Better.
More.
Better. They can't upgrade you. If the owner doesn't have unlimited ownership, they cannot grant unlimited ownership. By the way, I spent a lot of time on the boat in the last month. I look all tan. Y'all notice that? Like, this is not normal. I'm particularly tan today. I don't know. Maybe it's the lighting in here or something. Or maybe I just haven't looked at myself on camera in a month. See, I'm very random. Stuff like that pops in my head. I'm ADD. Sorry. You have to deal with it. You'll learn. You'll learn to deal with it. It's really important to understand this dynamic, though. That the grantor can always give a downgrade, but they can't give an upgrade. They can give you less than what they have. So that means who's really in control of the transaction? Who really has control over the type of ownership that ultimately is going to be conveyed? Grantor or grantee?
Grantor.
Grantor. Now, that's sort of true. I want to go back to this thought right here. When a property is what?
Sold.
Sold. Who's paying for the thing?
Grantee.
The grantee is. Does the grantee have some control over the kind of ownership they get?
Leverage.
Yeah.
Because they can say to the grantor, I'm only going to pay you for it if you do what?
Give me
Maybe full ownership or whatever.
Full, unlimited ownership. Couldn't a grantee do that?
yes.
Where do you think the best place to do that would be? In a what?
Courtroom.
In a contract. How about in a contract? If we were going on a contract, wouldn't it be good for the grantee? Because you don't want to just go on a contract and say, I want to buy your house at 114 Heidegger Drive because I'm going to give you the least I can possibly give you. You better be detailed and tell me what kind of ownership you want. Oh, you want it all. Oh, you better write that down. That's why these different types of ownership are important. Because the grantor is not going to always just automatically transfer you full and unlimited ownership unless you force them to. Can we agree that people generally only give you what they have to give you?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So we got to be specific. This is why you have to understand these different types of ownership. Is everybody with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about what full and unlimited ownership looks like. But before we get there, let's talk about the things that the grantor could limit. What is within the power of the grantor to limit about our ownership? Okay, you're selling me the property. What could you really do to me that could impact me? Well, there's two ways the grantor can impact you in a major way. Number one, they can limit the time that you own the property. Yeah, I said that. They can limit what?
Time.
They can put a time limit. They can put a countdown on your rear end. What do you think it means when they limit the time you own the property? What do you think happens when that alarm clock goes off?
You're out.
Your ownership goes where?
Somebody else.
Back to the
Depends.
Away. It goes away. And some of you are right when you say back to the grantor. Some of you say right when you say somebody else. We're going to talk about that part about where it goes. But the clear thing here is it goes where? Away. You lose it. I've had people say, well, isn't that like a lease? Well, sort of. It's one step up from a lease.
Was it different from a lease?
Because a lease is for a specified period of time, whereas grantors don't have the ability to limit for a specified period of time. They have the ability to limit it based on one thing, how long somebody lives. We call them life estates. So I can't sell somebody a property for 3 years. I can lease them the property for 3 years. But I can sell them the property until they what? Until they die. That's still limited by time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because normally when I'm selling somebody a property, I'm not limited by time. I sell it to them. Do they continue to own it after they die?
No.
Yes. Oh, look. It goes with the.
They and their who?
Heirs.
Their heirs continue to own it. But if I sell it to them, you own it until, Anna Lee, you own this property until you die. What are Anna Lee's heirs gonna get out of this thing?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing, because her ownership disappears the minute she's gone. That's a time limitation. That's a pretty big one too, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you a question. As a buyer, would you be satisfied with that?
No.
Probably not. And even if you were, would you probably pay less for that than you would for one that was forever?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other thing that the grantor can limit is use. What do you want to do with the property? Because the grantor can place some restrictions on your use of the property. We already talked about this earlier. We just didn't think about it in this regard. Remember when we talked about those developers putting covenants on the property?
Mhm.
When they put covenants there, what did they restrict?
What use?
You could do with the property. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
So what they actually are selling is less than full ownership that first time around because they are placing restrictions on the property. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. These are restrictions at the time of passing ownership. Now, if covenants are already there, I am passing you full ownership if I sell you my house. There may be covenants there, but I didn't put them there. They were already there. I had to honor them. You have to honor them after me. I'm still giving you. Anytime the grantor gives everything they have, that's all they can do. Does that make sense for everybody? You can't give an upgrade. You can always go down. Everybody okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So far?
I have one more question.
Okay.
And I don't think I've heard the word yet, but I'm trying to understand because I've actually started going through a contract for a property. And is the covenant, would that be the same as an addendum?
No, an addendum is an addition to some legal document, usually a contract. A covenant is a restriction that is placed against the use of a property.
Okay.
That's what,
So they're
within the contract.
Right. But now there could be addenda to the covenants, because you could take the original covenants and add to them. Anytime you're taking a legal document and adding to it at a later time, that's an addendum.
Okay. All right. I think
Okay.
I cleared it up. Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So now that we know the things that can be unlimited, let's talk about when a grantor does not limit transfer at all. If the grantor says, listen, I'm giving you everything I got. Everybody with me?
Mm-hmm.
They are not limiting what? What are the two things they could limit?
Time.
Time and use.
Use. They are choosing not to place any limits. When they choose not to place any limits whatsoever, they are granting what is called fee simple absolute ownership. Fees, and sometimes we leave the word absolute off, we just say fee simple, but it means the same thing. Fee simple absolute ownership, or just fee simple ownership, means that the grantor has not placed any restriction on use or time when they have transferred ownership. This is what we expect most of the time in a sales transaction. This is the highest form of ownership. So if you were writing a sales contract, now that you know that there are a bunch of different types of ownership, what kind of ownership do you think you would ask the seller to transfer you? What type of ownership would you ask for?
Simple absolute.
Simple absolute.
We would ask, if we were smart, in that contract for the seller to transfer us fee simple absolute ownership of the property, meaning they're not placing any restrictions on how long we own the property or what we can do with the property. Is everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fee simple absolute. And this is about, there are a bunch of different ways you can transfer ownership. This one happens, I don't know, roughly 99.9% of the time. Most of the time when we're selling property, it's being sold fee simple absolute. Now, I don't want you to, here's a couple things that people get confused about with fee simple absolute. It has nothing to do with debt or money. It has to do with the restrictions the grantor places on the property. If they don't place any restrictions, it's fee simple absolute. Is everybody with me on that?
Mhm.
So could I own my house and carry fee simple absolute but still have mortgage debt on it?
Yes.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what I have. I have fee simple absolute title to my property, but it also has mortgage debt attached to it. The two are not related to one another. Don't confuse fee simple absolute for free and clear. Some people do that sometimes. Those two things, they don't mean the same thing. Okay, is everybody all right with that?
Yeah.
Almost all sales transactions are fee simple absolute. This is by far the most common. That does not mean we don't have to talk about the others, especially for testing purposes. But in the real world, you're almost always dealing with fee simple absolute.
Hey, Travis,
Yes, sir, Tyler.
I have a question. So, let's say you buy a property and it's fee simple absolute, but there was a use restriction to the person, like they didn't get theirs fee simple absolute. Is that still fee simple absolute?
It is, because they're not placed. That's a great question. So, like, let's say Tyler, you're buying the property from Jory.
Okay.
Jory bought it from the developer, and the developer put a bunch of covenants on them, restrictions. So Jory did not get fee simple absolute title. Okay.
Okay.
But now Jory is selling you the property, and she's not placing any additional restrictions on it. You will get fee simple absolute title. Because all fee simple absolute means is that the grantor before you didn't place any what? Any restrictions. It doesn't mean that there are no restrictions there. It just means the current grantor is not placing any restrictions. Because we all understand that if restrictions are already in place, we have to honor those restrictions.
Okay. So it's just with that specific transfer. So
That's exactly right. This is a one-time, one-shot deal. Fee simple absolute doesn't refer to the property forever. It refers to that one transfer of the property.
Okay.
So
Good there?
conjunction with his question. So
Okay.
just to, I guess, reiterate it. So even if Jory bought the property from somebody and they had a restriction, she can still sell that even though she had a restriction to somebody else without a restriction.
No, that's not what I said.
Okay.
What I said was she can sell it fee simple absolute because she's not putting any restrictions on it. But those pre-existing conditions, those pre-existing restrictions are still going to be there because they are pertinent to the property.
Gotcha.
What that means is that the new buyer, Tyler in this case, should know those restrictions are there, because he's gonna, where would Tyler go to find those restrictions? He would look at whose deed?
The seller's deed.
He would look at Jory's deed, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If he looks at Jory's deed, he's gonna see, oh, well, she had to abide by these restrictions when she bought the property. So he knows that if she had to abide by them, he's also gonna have to abide by them in the future. And anybody who buys it from him is gonna have to abide by them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So Jory can still sell it to Tyler, fee simple absolute, but what she's gonna say to him is, Tyler, I'm giving you everything I got. Now, there were rules and restrictions that were in place before me, and you got to follow those just like I did. But I'm not adding to those. I'm not putting any more restrictions on. So I'm giving you fee simple absolute.
Makes sense.
Okay? Is everybody okay with that? So you can't assume that just because somebody owns it fee simple absolute, that they own it with no restrictions whatsoever. It just means whoever they bought it from didn't place any restrictions, but there may be older ones that are still in place. Confused yet? Don't worry, you will be. I work hard to make sure you're not. But all right, so let's talk about those two things again that the grantor can limit. They can limit time, or they can limit use. Limiting of time. Time equals life estate. Time limitations are life estates. When I say limit time, as I mentioned earlier, because the question was asked, what if, what's the difference between limiting time like this? I think it was Brittany who asked, and just doing a lease in the first place. Why not, why bother? Why not just do a lease in the first place? I think that was your question, right, Brittany?
Yes, sir.
And my answer was that the problem with the time limitations that we have to use with these kinds of deeds is that they're not very specific. They're only based on somebody's lifetime. So any time and this is how you're going to have to learn to deal with these tests. These are multiple choice tests. Did I mention, by the way, did I give you all the answers to the test? Did I tell y'all that? I can't remember if I told y'all that or not. Seriously, it's a serious question.
No.
I didn't. I will, honestly. I will give you every single answer on the day of the test too. I will.
After you take it?
No, I'll give it to you right with the test. I'll give you the test and I'll give you the answers.
You'll give us the answers to the test?
Yeah, you just have to pick which one's true.
That's exactly right. I just make you pick one of the four. I mean, I give you the right answer to every single question.
How does the testing process work with us being online?
Largely the same as it would in person. You'd be on video. We require you to be on video, and we have to be able to monitor you. So see that you're not cheating, doing those kinds of things. But yeah, pretty much the same.
So is it multiple choice?
It is multiple choice. There's no essays involved.
Okay.
I ain't got time for that. No, it's multiple choice. They're all multiple choice. And let me tell you how. And we're going to do a lot of test taking strategy as we work our way through the class. I am an excellent test taker. I'm that person you all hated when you were. How many of you hate standardized tests? Like, just hate them? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm that person you hated when you were in school. Because I'm going to be real honest with you. I can BS my way through any standardized test you put in front of me. You ever seen somebody, some of you are too young, you won't even know what I'm talking about. Y'all know what a Rubik's Cube is? Like a puzzle? You ever seen somebody who can just pick one up in like 15 seconds, and they just do it, and you just want to hit them with a baseball bat? Because the only way I could ever figure one out is to take the stickers off and cheat. That's the only way I could ever do one. But some people can do them because they can just see the solution. That's the way standardized tests are for me. I can just see. The answer just floats. Doesn't mean I know anything. See, it takes somebody who's really good at standardized tests to admit to you that they're complete crap. They're horrible. They have no bearing on whether you actually know the information. As a matter of fact, the worst possible way you can take the test in this class or the license exam is to try to find the correct answer to the questions. These questions are specifically written to try to lead you astray if you're looking for the right answer. Guess what answer you're looking for first?
Wrong.
Any answer that's absolutely wrong. Because what are you going to do with that one? You're going to eliminate it. You're going to eliminate it. And let me show you what I mean right here. You might see a test question and you have no idea what they're talking about. And it says, Jerry has inherited a property which she will own until the death of her first cousin, Thomas, at which time the property will transition to the ownership of a charity located in Cherokee, North Carolina. And you read that and you're like, I don't know what they are talking about. But here's what you do know. It said she would own it for a what?
Period of time.
A period of what?
Time.
Time. So find the answers that don't involve, what did I say time was equal to?
Inheritance, life
estate.
Be simple.
Life estate.
Life estates. Limiting time means what?
Life estate.
Life estate. So if you got, here's the thing, and this is how they'll do it to you on the test. You'll read that, you're like, they didn't give me enough information. This is bullshit. I can't answer this question. I've dealt with it. Listen, I deal with it all the time, and I get it, and you're right. But here's the thing. When you look at the answer choices, only one of them says life estate. Guess what?
That's the answer.
That's the answer. And all the rest of it was fluff. The answer was in the thing that said for a limited amount of what?
Time.
Because you know time should key you on life estate. These other three things aren't possible. It's got to be that. And that's gonna definitively be the best way to tackle these test questions. And so it's the way I sort of teach. I teach you from a process of elimination. So there really is a method to my madness. I'm not completely crazy. I'm somewhat crazy, but I'm not completely all gone. I try to teach you how the brain of a test taker works, so that you are not intimidated by the test. Because here's what I've come to learn in my years of teaching this class. It's not just about teaching you the material. It's also about having you be confident that you're not going to be tripped up by the test. And in some ways, I think that's the most important thing I teach, which is how to be confident that you're not going to be tripped up by the test. I will tell you, the people that write these tests are not that smart. They're really not. I know them. Like, I personally know them. They're not that smart. So if you will learn their games, it's very easy to unravel the answer to these kinds of questions. So you just learn to key on certain things. When you're paying attention to these kinds of questions of what type of ownership somebody has, here's what you're looking for. Are they limiting anything? If you say, if the answer is they're not limiting anything, then what kind of ownership do we have?
Simple absolute.
Be simple absolute. You don't even need to read the rest, right? It could be 3 paragraphs long. But if they're giving ownership and not placing any limits, you know it has to be what?
Be simple absolute.
Simple absolute. If they're giving ownership and it's for a limited amount of time, it's got to be a what?
Life estate.
A life estate. Now we're going to talk about there are a couple different types of life estates, but that might be enough to answer the question right there. I'm telling you, at least it'll get you to a 50-50 chance. Is that helpful to understand? You know, things that they're going to key on and things that you should key on. The same is also true on the other end. What's the other thing we can limit?
Use.
Okay. So use are these things: fee simple, determinable, and fee simple subject to a condition. But let me ask you this question. If I see a limitation of, let me go back. If I see a limitation of use, try to change color here. If I see a limitation of use, what do I know it's not? Number one, what can I eliminate? It's got a limitation period, so it's not what?
Fee simple absolute.
It's not fee simple absolute. The limitation didn't say anything about time, so it's not what?
Life estate.
It's none of these. Folks, that might be enough to answer the question right there. See, I'm not looking for the correct one. I'm looking for ones I can do what?
Eliminate.
Looking for ones I can get rid of. Are you with me on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So now that I've marked all over that, let's talk about these life estates. Let's talk. And what do we say? Life estates were a limitation of what?
Time.
Picture. Time. Time is not on your side when you have a life estate. As a matter of fact, time is definitively against you when you have a life estate. And here's the reason for that. When you have a life estate, your ownership not may end, not might end, your ownership will end. Is everybody with me on that? Your ownership will come to an end, and it will come to a very immediate and abrupt end. When somebody does what?
Dies.
Die. Now notice I didn't say when you die, because I said when somebody dies, because the truth is we could base this thing on your life, or we could base it on somebody else's life. Is everybody with me on that? Mm-hmm. So why don't we do this? It's time for me. I owe you a little break here. Why don't you take 5 minutes, run to the restroom. When we come back, we're going to talk about the differentiation between these types of life estates. We're going to talk about what it means when the limitation is based on your life or somebody else's life. Okay? So take 5. I got 3:10, say 3:15. All right, everybody, welcome back. Get back settled back in. Hopefully that was enough time to hit the restroom. And we are running like a well-oiled machine around here today already on day one. We're booking right along. Looks like we're gonna have you out of here a little bit early. It's a good thing, right? Everybody can use early in their life. Plus, I find you get too much of this eventually, and it starts to just be a blur, a complete and utter blur. All right, so let's pick it up where we left off before we quit restroom break, which was talking about life estates. And just remind me, help me out. What did we say life estates were a limitation of? The grantor's placing a limitation, and that limitation is what?
Time.
Time. Good. Very good. So we got a time limitation. We got this grantor who wants to be a jerk for whatever reason and limit the amount of time that we can own the property. Now, when this happens, let me be clear about this. This is probably not going to be a sales transaction, because most buyers, if they're buying the property, are not going to accept, I'm only going to own it for a limited amount of time. Most people, if they're buying the property, want to own it forever. They want to be able to leave it as an inheritance for their children, or, they don't want to, sit there and be worried about looking around the corner about who's going to die to lose ownership. So we're most of the time not talking about purchases when we talk about life estates. But think about gifts. Think about inheritances. If you are for example, I'm trying to remember who it was earlier was talking about inheriting property. It'll come to me in just a second as I scan them.
Cassie.
It was Cassie, thank you. Was talking about inheriting property. Well, the thing is, when you inherit the property, you have no control over the type of ownership you get. Who's in control of that?
Grantor.
The grantor, the dead person, right? The person who passed away. And what are you going to say? Nope, I won't take it. Well, I'd rather have less than full ownership than no ownership at all. So you're pretty much stuck with it. So this is not usually in a sales transaction. It's usually in a gift or an inheritance or something like that. But the way we distinguish the type of life estate we're dealing with is whose life it's based on. Because it could be based on the life of the grantee, or it could be based on somebody else's life. And guess who gets to choose that? Who's in control of this? Who's driving this bus?
Grantor.
The grantor. The original owner, the one who's giving this ownership over, is driving the bus. They're choosing, okay, I'm going to give Tasha ownership of the property for a limited amount of time. And I'm also going to decide whose life to base that on. Could I give Tasha ownership until Tasha dies?
Yes.
Absolutely. Could I give Tasha ownership until Taylor dies?
Yes.
Yes.
I could. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm the grantor. I do whatever I want to do. Mm-hmm. You stuck with it. Here's what I don't want you to forget. This is still a freehold interest. What did we say freehold meant?
Own it.
Ownership. I have the freedom to hold it, keep it, or the freedom to do what?
So
to dispose of it.
To sell it. If a life estate is a freehold ownership, can I sell it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can sell the property. But remember when I told you, you can always give whatever you have as far as ownership, and you can always downgrade when you grant ownership, but you can never what?
Upgrade.
So let's just, for argument's sake, say that we've given Tasha a life estate. Tasha, you own this farm until you die.
Okay.
Who does the farm belong to?
Me until I die.
Tasha.
Tasha.
Unless Tasha's dead.
Who keeps the rental income if she rents the farm out?
Me till I die.
Tasha does. if there's a house there, can Tasha live in it?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. Can Tasha sell the property?
Yes.
Yeah.
She can.
It's sticky.
She can sell it with the same restriction she got. Is everybody with me on that?
Mhm.
Explain to me exactly what kind of ownership Tasha has. Tasha has ownership until what?
Tasha dies.
Until Tasha dies. That's her exact form of ownership. Does everybody agree with me on that?
Yep.
So let's say here comes Jonathan, and he wants to buy this property from Tasha, and she's more than happy to sell it because she ain't feeling so well anyway. All right, sorry, Tasha. Somebody got to die to have this discussion. Here comes Jonathan, and he's interested in buying the property from Tasha, and he makes her an offer. Can she sell it to him?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, but she can only sell what she owns, which is she owns the property until Tasha dies. So how will Jonathan own the property?
Until Tasha dies.
Until Tasha dies.
It's a measuring
You
line.
can't upgrade it. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
It's not going to change until Jonathan owns it, till Jonathan dies, because if some people would just keep selling these things, let me find somebody young, sell it to them, and they'll own it. It doesn't work that way. What's going to stay locked in is this chain of events is going to end when Tasha dies.
So when Tasha dies, where does it go to? Does it go to the bank?
No, we're going to talk about that. That's a great question, Mary. And we're getting there. And then it's good you're asking that question, because that's the most natural question. Like, where the hell does it go? Well, I mean, if you don't own it anymore, where does it go? So, is everybody understanding this idea of the grantor putting a time limit on this thing? Is everybody all right with that?
Yep.
And we understand that Tasha can sell it. Jonathan buys it from her. So now Jonathan owns it till Tasha dies. Can Jonathan sell it?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, if he can find another sucker, he sure can buy it and sell it too. And they will own it until what?
Tasha
dies. So he sells it to Jory, and Jory's like, well, who is Tasha? John's like, I don't know. You gotta find her, because you only gonna own it until she dies. So if Tasha gets sick, guess who's gonna bring her chicken soup?
Me.
Jory is. Because she needs to feel real good.
Girl, we're getting you better.
And live a long, exactly. If Tasha's family's like, I think we're gonna pull the plug, Jory gonna be over there. No, be no plug pulling today. No, because her ownership would be limited based on Tasha's life. Is everybody with me on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
That's how.
question though, with if by chance it was in the process of the sale process was already started and they were getting ready to basically pass ownership over, but the closing hadn't actually happened. What if she died in between that crossover?
Then
No, sorry, Tasha. I'm so sorry. I just killed you
What
all.
we did, girl.
I'm so sorry.
Somebody's got to die in the making. If she were to die, simply put, her ownership would go away, so there'd be no contract. You can't buy what doesn't exist. If you were buying,
So it just fall through.
The contract would fall through. That's exactly right. The contract would fall through. Everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now,
Hey Travis, I think Angelica had a question about.
Let me see. That's what you're here for. I appreciate it, because I don't have to chat up all the time.
She said, "Does life also apply to the company and life estates?"
Does life also apply to a company and life estates? And I'm assuming what you mean, Angelica, is can a corporation, for example, be granted ownership for someone's lifetime? And the answer to that question is yes. I mean, you would treat a company or a corporation the same as you would a human, whether they were the owner of the property or what we call the measuring life. That would you would treat them the same. So if we gave it to Blue Sky Corporation until Blue Sky Corporation died, then they would own it until they went out of business. That's how you apply the idea of life to. Now, most of the time, life estates are not used in that regard. So let's talk about some terminology, and then I want to discuss why we would do this, because I think it's a lot easier to understand a topic. Because most of the time when I introduce life estates, everybody's like, okay, I sort of get it, but what the heck does that even exist for, right? How many of you are sitting out there going, what? Why bother? Why did the grantor give Tasha ownership of this thing just until she dies, right? It just seems odd, and it is odd.
You protect
You don't-
it.
I'm sorry.
You gotta protect it sometimes.
Sometimes you do want to, and it's all about control. Grantors who do this, they want to remain in control. Because let me point something out here to you. If I just give Tasha ownership, if I give her fee simple absolute ownership, what could she do with the property?
Anything I want.
Anything she wants. Could she sell it to somebody?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Maybe Tasha's got some bad recreational habits. Maybe, here, let me give you for example. What if I have a child, an adult child, and I have a grandchild, and I'm writing my will. Now my grandchild is a minor, so I don't want to leave them the property. They're 2 years old. Everybody following me so far? But now my daughter, she's not the most stable in the world. And I'm very worried that if I leave, because we own a family farm in Edgecombe County, if I leave the family farm to my daughter, do I have to be worried that she might mess it up at some point along the way? She might lose the farm, she might sell the farm,
Yes.
she may and then squander the money, and then my grandchild has nothing.
Don't have anything.
Do I have to be worried about that?
Yes.
That could happen, right?
Right.
I could guarantee you that doesn't happen. I could leave the farm to my daughter until what?
She
Until
does.
she
Until
dies.
Until she dies.
Oh, until she dies.
And then I could name who to get it after my daughter dies.
Grandson.
Grandchild. So that means no matter how badly my daughter, the screw up, screws it up, when she's gone, who's going to end up with the farm? My grandchild. Does that make sense for everybody? Like you might want to structure something like that.
Yeah, because even if your daughter sold it, it would still be your grandchild.
Come right back.
Yeah.
Comes right back on.
Question.
And that's
just.
Deborah, go ahead.
What happens if the daughter, who's not responsible, what happens if she doesn't pay the property taxes and maintains the property?
Well, that is what happens then is interesting, because obviously if she doesn't pay the property taxes, it could be foreclosed on by the county. But what the county would have to do, interestingly enough, even if they foreclosed on it, would have to be to give the person that I had named as next in line the ability to come in and pay the taxes and say, we're going to foreclose on this. You're supposed to be next in line. Do you want to pay the taxes? Do you want to step up? So it still protects that lineage, so to speak, that progression that the grantor wanted.
But what if the next person in line is like 5 years old?
Well, and then that would probably be for a judge to decide. Most likely what the county would probably do is put the property aside and not sell it until that person became an adult, and then give them the opportunity. Most likely. Most likely. That would be up to a judge in that case.
Could they go against the property and pay the taxes?
Could be
well, like put a lien against the property.
They will put a lien against the property, but they might not act on the lien.
Okay.
And they may wait. Yeah.
Does the time always have to mean in the area of death? Could it be like once, like for example, the one that you used, could it be where your granddaughter or whoever reached a certain age and then they would receive the property?
No, can't do that. That's a trust. You got to set up a trust for that. A life estate is definitely based on death. We should call them death estates because that's what they really are. Beverly, go ahead.
We had a situation in our church that this was a really good thing. We had an old elderly couple. Their house was condemned by the city, and some people in our church that had property with a house on it renovated that house and has given that elderly couple a life estate in that house, so they'll have somewhere to stay until they die.
There you go. And so they've essentially, and I've seen this with, I actually dealt with this, and I thought it was hilarious because the guy was a jerk, complete jerk. I had a guy come to me a couple times, come to me a few years ago, and he wanted to sell his mother's house in Raleigh over by North Hills. And she had Alzheimer's, was in had just been moved to a care facility, and he wanted to sell the house. And he came to me and said, I want to list the house for sale. And I said, well, who owns the house? He said, well, I do. And I said, okay. So I went and I pulled the tax records and I called him back and I said, you don't own the house. Well, yes, I do. She's already given me the house. I said, you will own the house. He said, no, I'm not inheriting the house. I already own it. She's already signed it over to me. I said, clearly you don't understand what she actually signed over to you. She did sign the house over to you, in a matter of speaking. What she did was she signed the house over to herself as a life estate. And she named him as the remainder man, which meant he would get it when she what?
Died.
When she died. Apparently she knew who she was dealing with. And knew he could try to sell it out from under her, and he couldn't do it because though he was going to be the future owner, she had the life estate as long as she was still alive. And so there are applications for these things. I mean, it sounds crazy, but sometimes it makes sense. We actually had one in our family. I've mentioned several times we have a family farm in Edgecombe County. Well, when I was growing up, our farm was roughly twice the size that it is now. I didn't understand that at the time. I do now. My grandfather actually had a life estate in the neighboring farm. When he was a very young man, his next door neighbors had no children. They were both elderly, and he took care of them. He took care of them. He took care of their farm. He was in his 20s. They were in their 80s, and they died within 2 months of each other. And when the husband died, of course, he left the farm to his wife. When she died, she left it to my grandfather as a life estate. She had never had, they had one child that died in childbirth, and she had always donated money to the Children's Home of North Carolina. It's her favorite charity. When she died, she left my grandfather a life estate of that farm and named the Children's Home of North Carolina as the remainder man. In other words, my grandfather owned the farm until he what?
He died.
Until he died, at which time the farm became the property of her favorite charity, which was the Children's Home of North Carolina. She wanted to take care of my grandfather because he had taken care of them, but she wanted to eventually have the farm go to her favorite charity. And that's exactly what happened. My grandfather lived to be 84 for 60 years. He had a life estate in that farm, in addition to our farm, that was our family farm. And, but the day he died, that ceased to be our farm, that part of it, and became property of the Children's Home of North Carolina. So they are useful for those kinds of situations. So there's some vocabulary you need to know about life estates. The life tenant. Now, don't let this word tenant confuse you. A life tenant is the owner. That's the person that so in our example, Tasha owns the property until Tasha dies. She is the what?
Life tenant.
Life tenant.
She's the life tenant because she owns the property for a limited amount of time. The life tenant is the one who has ownership for a limited amount of time. Every life estate needs at least 2 people. At least 2, maybe more, but at least 2. Is everybody with me on that? Mm-hmm. The other thing a life estate must have is somebody called the measuring life. We need the life tenant, but we also need the measuring life. Now, here's what we know about the measuring life. The measuring life is the one who we're watching. That's the one who is the clock. The measuring life is like Flavor Flav, a big old clock hanging around her neck. That's the countdown. And the measuring life could be the same as the life tenant, or it could be somebody completely different. Tasha owns this property until Tasha dies. Well, we said Tasha was the life tenant because she owns the property for a limited amount of time. Guess what she also is?
Measuring.
She's also the measuring life. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
But now, we said Tasha, didn't we say Tasha could sell this thing?
Yes.
And we said she might sell it to Jonathan. And when she sold it to Jonathan, we said Jonathan would own the property until what happened?
Tasha dies.
Tasha dies. So who's the life tenant now? Jonathan owns it until Tasha dies. Who's the life tenant?
Jonathan.
Jonathan, because he's the one that owns it for a limited period of time. But who's the measuring life?
Tasha.
Tasha. Are y'all with me on that?
Yeah.
Okay. The one who owns it for a limited amount of time is the life tenant. The one who's ticking is the measuring life. Okay?
I have a question.
Okay.
Does the remainder man get fee simple absolute ownership of the property at the end?
It's a really good question. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, and this was a question that Mary had right off the bat. I think it was Mary. If it was somebody else, I apologize. I'm pretty sure it was Mary. I'm pointing at the screen just like you can see who I'm pointing at.
Yep.
Mary, you're right there, Mary. I'm pointing at you. What happens when this thing is over? What happens at the end of the life estate? That's where we get into the remainder and the reversionary. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to draw a line right here. Because the two terms at the top of the page are while the life estate's going on. The two terms at the bottom are when the life estate what? When it ends. When who dies?
The measuring
life.
So once the measuring life dies, then we need to know, okay, where is this thing going? Who's going to own it next? Who's next in line? The property needs an owner. Everybody with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And next in line is completely up to the original grantor who created this mess in the first place. No matter how long ago it was created, no matter how many people have bought and sold it in between, the original grantor, when they created this thing, got to decide what was going to happen at the end of it. And here's what they said. Tasha, you own it until Tasha dies, and then it goes to Michelle. Michelle is what we know as a remainder man. Is everybody okay with that? Mm-hmm. Michelle is the remainder man. The remainder man gets it when who dies?
Measuring life.
When the measuring life dies. That's you get the remainder. You get what's left. So let me ask you just a theoretical question. Theoretically, would you rather be the life tenant or the remainder man?
Remainder man.
I'd love to be the remainder man because here's the answer to Sarah's question. Sarah asked me a very specific question. Is the remainder man going to get fee simple absolute ownership? What do you think my answer is?
Yes.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So, Tasha, you own it until Tasha dies, and then it goes to Michelle. Would you rather be Tasha or Michelle?
Michelle.
I'd rather be Michelle because all she got to do is wait. See, Tasha's going to own it for a limited amount of time, and just because she can sell it doesn't mean anybody's going to actually buy it. Because as soon as she starts telling somebody, well, I can sell it to you, but here's the deal. You only going to own it as long as I live. Somebody's going to say, no, run that by me one more time. They're not going to buy it. So Tasha's not going to really have, she theoretically can sell it, but most likely she's not going to be able to. But now,
unless me and Tasha are similar in age, then yeah.
Maybe, and maybe you think that. Listen, maybe Tasha runs marathons every day. Maybe you think she's going to live to be 100. Maybe Tasha's parents are still alive and they're 140. You know, and you're just looking at her and be like, long time, man. It'd be worth it. But it's going to be tough, most likely. But Michelle, all she's got to do is wait. Because when she gets ownership, she's going to get fee simple absolute ownership. Is everybody okay with that?
I have a question. So basically, I guess it's all in the beginning portion is where I'm getting messed up at. So clearly somebody said that Tasha is gonna be the life tenant. So someone somewhere said.
No, I'm the measuring life.
Well, you were
Could be
also the life tenant. Tasha owns it
Right.
until
Yeah.
Tasha dies.
I
be
sell
both.
it to someone else.
So
No.
we'll just say you. So Travis had said, Tasha, you're gonna own this house until you die.
Yep.
And then in that time, Travis goes, Tasha goes, who named the remainder man?
I did. As soon as I created it. I don't wait till Tasha dies. I do it at the very beginning. Tasha owns it till Tasha dies, and then it goes to Michelle, all in one big long statement.
You're the grantor, right?
The grantor.
I'm the grantor.
And so Tasha will never be the grantor.
She could be the
No,
grantor.
well.
She could be the grantor when she sold it to Jonathan, but she can only grant Jonathan what she has. She can't undo my restriction. She can't take. Remember, she can pass along, but she can't take away restrictions.
I have a question.
Okay.
With it being the life tenant and the measuring life being different, what happens if the life tenant dies while the measuring life is still living? Does it automatically go back to the reversionary interest?
All right. Here's Terry's question. We're going to work with our same example we've been working with. Tasha owns it until Tasha dies, and then it goes to Michelle. Is everybody with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. And Tasha sells it to Jonathan. That's what we said happened, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, Jonathan owns it until what?
Tasha dies.
Until Tasha dies, and then it
Or
goes
who sells
to...
it?
Where does it go after Tasha dies?
Michelle.
To Michelle. Everybody with me?
Yep.
That's our current status. Jonathan owns it right now until Tasha dies, and then it goes to Michelle. Everybody with me on that status?
Mm-hmm.
Here's Terry's question. What if Jonathan dies? Nobody cares if Jonathan dies.
No.
From the life estate perspective, we don't care if Jonathan dies because he doesn't have anything to do with how long the life estate goes on. He's got a will. He will will it to whoever his heirs are, and they will take ownership with the same.
Until Tasha dies.
His heirs would own it until what?
Tasha dies.
Tasha dies, and then it still goes to Michelle.
Okay.
What if
I was straight until just now.
what if Michelle outlives Tasha?
I'm
Or
sorry.
no, what if Tasha outlives Michelle?
Doesn't matter. Michelle would have heirs, right?
But what
So
if she doesn't?
she would. Everybody has an heir.
Yeah.
Everybody has an heir. Because if you don't name one, guess who your heir is?
North
North
Carolina.
State of North Carolina. Everybody has an heir. So if Michelle dies, and she might, the remainder man could always die before the measuring life does.
Michelle, you look so sad.
No. What if Michelle passes away? Well, if she does, whoever is in her will as her heir, they would become the remainder man.
All right. So what if the measuring life, because obviously if you buy it, you're making payments on it. What if they don't pay it off before they die, and does whoever the land then goes to have to finish paying it off?
The debt
Remember,
follows.
any
I
debt.
didn't hear the question.
The question was, what if there's debt associated with the property? What if there is a mortgage note on the property? And what if it's not completely paid off when the measuring life dies? Does the remainder man take on that debt? Just like any other transfer of ownership, the debt is attached to the property. And so the new owner, if they wanted to continue to own the property, would need to pay off the debt. Otherwise, the property could be foreclosed as a result of not paying the debt. Because the debt is not attached to the person, it's attached to the property.
So if it was foreclosed, then it would go to the bank, correct?
If it's foreclosed, it goes to the lender that's foreclosing on it.
Okay.
Correct. Whomever's foreclosing on it. It doesn't have to be a bank. It could be the county for unpaid property taxes. I mean, there's a number of foreclosure avenues. But yes, it would go to whomever's foreclosing on it. Okay? So the other last term that you've got on the screen here is something called a reversionary interest. This is what I call the lazy grantor. This is the grantor in the beginning didn't tell you what was going to happen with the property. They didn't want to answer Mary's question. Mary jumped up right out of the beginning, out of the gate. She said, where the hell is this going to go when it's over with? And if everybody's looking at everybody going, I don't know. I don't know. He didn't say. If I just said, Tasha, you own it until you die, then it goes to Michelle. Well, what's the natural question? Well, sorry, I answered the question. That one's going to Michelle. What if I just said, Tasha, you own it till you die? What's the natural question?
Where's it going?
Who gets it after Michelle?
Who gets it after Tasha, right? If I say, Beverly, you own it until Sarah dies. Well, the natural question is, who gets it after Sarah dies?
Back to
If
you.
I don't say,
it's the reversionary.
Beverly, the grantor.
It goes back to the original person.
It goes back to
that
grantor
sold
with
it.
the reversionary interest.
it goes right back to me. Comes right back to me. Living or dead, it comes back to me. If I'm alive, I get it back. If I'm not, who gets it?
Your heirs.
Your heirs.
That's why it's called a reversionary interest. It reverts back to where it started. Now, that's pretty rare. I would imagine that most people who set up a life estate are going to say what they want to happen with it after it's over. But this is just sort of a protection if they don't.
Is this someone with a lot of property?
They may only have one property.
Yeah.
But they want control. Because the problem with just giving somebody ownership of property is you're out of control. You know, if I just give Tasha the property, Tasha, the property's yours. I can't control what she does with it.
Right.
If I give it to her until she dies, I can't control with it while she's alive, but I know what's going to happen when she dies. I know it's going to Michelle. So it's just a way to exert control. That's all. I'll give you another perfect example. This is a real life example, and it's a very useful implementation of a life estate. I talked to a married couple, a while back, and they are happily married, but neither of them get along with the other's children from previous marriage. This is marriage number 2 for both of them. They both have children from a previous marriage. Both sets of children are very resentful of mom or dad's new spouse. Is everybody with me on this?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the wife has a property that's been in her family for a while. She's owned it. She owned it prior to her marriage. She still owns it. She wants her children to inherit that property. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
And she can do that. That's easy. She can have a will that says her children inherit the property. Everybody with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
So far, so good?
Yep.
Here's going to be the problem with that. What if she dies before her husband? What's going to happen to the ownership of that property in spite of her will that says it goes to her children?
It goes to her
husband.
It goes to her husband as a function of North Carolina's marital laws.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember what I said the relationship was between the husband and her children?
Not good.
Not good.
Not good. And this is she came to me with this exact question. She said, what's going to happen if I die first and he decides to write my children out of his will? How can I stop that? I said, well, you can't stop that. You can't stop him from, could that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If she dies first and he gets the property, could he just right away just take her children right out of his will and leave her property to his kids?
His children.
That she hated.
Unless they signed a prenup.
Leave her, and they don't have a prenuptial agreement. Could they do that? Could he do that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I said, you want to fix it? I said,
do they not have to be married for a certain number of years?
No, and that's marital law. We don't want to dive too far down the rabbit hole of marital law, but they don't. No. Here's how you fix it. She needs to right now grant the property to herself
As
as
a
a
living.
life estate
Yeah.
and name who as the remainder men?
Her kids.
Her children.
Yes.
Her children. So no matter if she goes first, last, or in the middle, the minute she dies, what happens to ownership of that particular property?
Goes to her children.
It goes to her children. You see how that could be a very important use of this tool?
If she's married, wouldn't her spouse have to agree to that?
If she's married, yes, and he is agreeable right now. Her question, her concern was, what happens after I'm gone? What happens if I die and 5 years later down the road, the relationship has deteriorated even more? What do I, and they were, and honestly, they were both coming to me saying, this is what we want to do with both of our properties. They both own property from previous lives, and they both basically said, I want my kids to get my stuff, and I want his kids to get his stuff, and how the hell do we make that happen? How do we make it so we don't have to worry about this? And life estate's the way to do it.
Okay, I have a question. You said that the question that she asked was, do they have to be both in agreement to it? For a property that she has owned prior into the marriage and her name is the only name that is on the deed, she still has to get her husband to sign off on the life estate. Okay.
Yeah, that's the way marital law works. In North Carolina, when you put a ring on it, you're giving them half of everything you own, debts and assets. Yeah, that's
What if
marital
she
law, not real
inherited it
estate.
from her parents?
I'm sorry?
What if she inherited it? from
Doesn't
her
matter.
parents?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. That's just like our family farm in Edgecombe County. My mom will swear to her grave that, even though my parents are still married, she would tell you my dad has nothing to do with that farm. I'm like, well, you better not die first, because I hate to tell you he does according to the law. So, that's just the way it works.
Even in a prenup situation, it wouldn't matter.
Well, in a prenup, that's different. The whole purpose of a prenuptial agreement is to agree to those things ahead. The prenuptial takes the place of the marital contract.
Okay. Because I was about to say, like, we have at the real estate office, we've got 2 properties that we manage. Both of them, like, it was kind of like the situation you were describing. They got married, they had previous marriages, and they both had homes. And they bought a house together, and, they moved in their families together and everything, but they didn't want to get rid of their homes because it's in a good area to where, because of the military community, it needs to be a good rental property. So they basically turn their rental properties into rental properties and using that money for their kids. Like, they've created trust accounts for their kids with the income that they're getting off of their rental properties.
So it's a method of planning. That's what it is. That's what life estates are. Okay. Do we understand the terminology here? Everybody good on that? Okay, good. Somebody asked when today's video would be available. Probably this evening. But remember, you don't have to rely. I've already sent you a link to the YouTube playlist. You have lectures of previous classes of this same material, so you don't have to necessarily wait for this particular video. In fact, you may want to watch a different one, because I say it, slightly differently every single time, because different people ask different questions, and then you may hear a certain question, be like, oh, I got it. And I'm gonna tell you, don't feel bad if you're confused by life estates. Everybody, the first time they hear life estates, is like, what? But when it clicks, you can be like, I feel stupid that I was ever confused by that, because it's honestly a straightforward thing. Let me tell you where you run yourself down the rabbit hole. Nobody cares what happens when anybody dies except one person. What's the one person dying that matters?
Measuring life.
The measuring life. That's it. Not even the life tenant. Not the grantor. Nobody. The only one we care about is the measuring life. The rest of it is just background noise. Okay? All right? On the test, they might want you to know the difference between something called a conventional life estate and a life estate pro rata. Really super easy to tell the difference. They work exactly the same way. Tasha owns the property till Tasha dies. Now I'm going to tell you that's a conventional life estate. Now I'm going to give you another one. I'm going to tell you it's a life estate pro rata, and you tell me what the difference is. All right, so I'm going to repeat that. Tasha owns the property till Tasha dies. That is a conventional life estate. Kaylin owns this farm until Anna Lee dies. That's a life estate per ultra V. Tell me what the difference is between the two.
Someone else.
The number of
A
people.
live tenant
The
is
number
different.
of people is different, right?
The life tenant measurable is the same doing conventional.
With Tasha's example, the life tenant and the measuring life were who?
The same person.
Same person. That's called a conventional life estate. With Kaylin's example, Kaylin owns the farm until Anna Lee dies. It's two separate people. That's called a life estate per ultra V. It means for the life of another. It's fancy. For the life of another. Latin. You get a lot of Latin in this class.
Yeah.
I took Latin in high school. What a waste. Not really. I mean, it helped me with the SAT, but maybe I knew I was going to teach a real estate class one day and I didn't know Latin. You know, I took 2 years of Latin. You know what I asked my high school Latin teacher at the end of 2 years? She hated me, by the way. You know what I asked her at the end of 2 years? I said, so where can I go to speak this? And she looked at me and she said, what do you mean? I said, well, where do I go? They speak this language. And she said, well, they haven't spoken this language in 2,000 years. I said, then why am I taking it? I've been in class for 2 years and I know it was a dead language. It shows you how much attention I paid in Latin in high school. So, yeah. Are we good on the difference between a conventional life estate and a life estate per ultra V? Yeah. Now, keep in mind, you pair them together. Could we have a conventional life estate with a remainder interest? Is that possible? Conventional life estate with a remainder?
Yes.
Could we have a conventional life estate with a reversionary?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Could we have life estate per ultra V with a remainder?
Yes.
And life estate per ultra V with a reversionary, right? You just pick and pull, one from each side. Good. Good. Now let's talk about the last two. We're down to 2 forms of ownership. Can y'all believe it? We're down to 2. It's going to be the last 2 things I give you for today. I'm not going to challenge you any further because I can see you brains. I want to talk about something
I
called.
have a question.
You have a question? What's your question?
Well, it's more so just like a quick break before you do the 2 next things. A student just asked if they thought it would be a good idea to do the learn test pass after each class for those tests or before. So do you think it'd be a good idea for them to go on today and test, or?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to do it anytime, honestly, before, during, after. But certainly, if you can do it right after we do the class, that's a good thing. We will on most days have quizzes. We won't have a quiz today because we haven't quite finished. We will not finish chapter 2 at the end of today. But there will be a lot of days where I'll give you quizzes that kind of force you to go back and look at the information. But yeah, as quickly as you can go back and review. That's probably a good idea.
I have a quick question as well.
Okay, go for it.
On your email that you sent, you said that we need to kind of look at the lectures and stuff online so we can kind of know what's going on. I've already did all 3 of yours online. So is it okay to do those quizzes online ahead if I've already read the chapters?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right.
That's absolutely fine. No doubt. I'm trying to copy something.
So is your intention to cover chapters 3 and 4 tomorrow and 5 and 6 on Wednesday?
No, well, it doesn't really work out in like perfect numbers. There are certain chapters that are just way longer than others. Chapter 4 is like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours tops. Chapter 5 is significantly longer. Chapter 6 is another short one. So it'll take, tomorrow we will finish chapter 2 and probably get through chapter 3. And then on Wednesday, most likely 4 through 6, because 2 of those are shorter chapters.
Okay.
It's not, and then there'll be some chapters, like when we get to chapter 7, we'll spend 2 whole days on just chapter 7. So you can't really, base the number of, it's not going to be like a consistent 2 chapters per day. That's for sure.
Gotcha.
That's definitely for sure. All right. So let's talk about the last 2 forms of ownership interest that you might have, which are fee simple determinable and fee simple subject to a condition. Now we said life estates were a limitation of what? Time or use? Which one?
Time.
Time. Life estates only limit time. What could Tasha do with the property? Tasha owns it till Tasha dies. What could she do with the property?
Anything she wants.
Everything she wants, as long as she owns it, right? I didn't restrict her use. All I restricted was what?
Time she owns it.
How long she owns it. The grantor could also choose, rather than restricting time, to restrict use. And that's where these 2 come into the picture. If we restrict use rather than restricting time, we call that fee simple defeasible. And that has 2 different types, fee simple determinable and fee simple subject to a condition. Now, I can assure you it won't take us nearly as long to talk about these 2 as it did the life estates. These are much easier to understand. It's much easier to understand use restrictions than it is time restrictions. If the grantor tells you this, Beverly, you own the property as long as you don't put a trailer park there. What did the grantor say? Did the grantor say what Beverly could do or what Beverly could not do? Which one did the grantor say?
Could not.
Could not do. Terry, you own this property as long as you keep it a park forever. Did the grantor tell Terry what he could do or what he could not do?
Could.
What he could do. That's the difference between the 2. If the grantor tells Terry what he can do, that is a fee simple determinable deed. The grantor has determined in advance what the property can be used for. Here's the interesting thing about this restriction. It is a pertinent. What does that mean? How long is it going to last?
Forever.
So can Terry, how long is Terry going to own this property?
Until he dies.
She does.
Or till he sells it.
How long is Terry going to own this property?
As long as he keeps it a park.
Forever. As long as he keeps it a what?
A park.
Yeah.
His only restriction is not based on time, it's based on use. Everybody with me on that?
Right.
Can he sell it?
Yes.
What's the next person gonna have to do?
Keep it apart.
Keep it as a park.
Can they sell it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the next person gonna have to do?
Keep it as a park.
How long is that gonna last? Forever. And if it stops being used as a park?
They no longer.
They lose ownership. It goes to the state.
It reverts back to the state.
Yeah.
It reverts back to the original grantor. It could go back to the state if the grantor doesn't have any heirs. It reverts back to the original grantor. Good. That's where it came from. Okay? So it's a use restriction. Whereas I said, if Beverly owns this property as long as she doesn't put a trailer park there, that restriction still lasts forever. But what can Beverly do with the property?
Whatever she wants other than that.
Anything other than put a trailer park.
Other than put a trailer park there. So that's called fee simple subject to a condition. So let me ask you this question. Which one would you rather have? Would you rather have fee simple determinable or would you rather have fee simple subject to a condition?
Subject to a condition.
I'd rather have subject to a condition every time. Because if you tell me what I can't do, then that means I can do a lot of things. If you tell me what I can do, then I am very limited on what I can do. Is everybody with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only differentiation between the two. Those are much easier. As far as inheritance goes, every type of ownership, this is going to be a test question, by the way, in some format. Every type of ownership, and we've done a lot of them, every freehold interest can be inherited, meaning the owner can leave it to their heirs. How many of them? How many? All of them, right? Say that with me. All of them. Every single type of ownership can be left to who? Heirs. I just forced you to lie.
Except
conventional life is not inherited.
Except one. Do you think it's possible they might ask you a test question about the one that's not inheritable?
Yes, absolutely.
And the one that's not inheritable is a conventional life estate. That is the only type of ownership. And if you think about it, it makes sense that that's not inheritable. How could it be? Tasha owns the property until Tasha dies. Remember, we said that's conventional, right? Because the measuring life and the life tenant are who?
The same person.
Same person. Tasha owns the property till Tasha dies. When would her heirs get the property?
Never.
They won't.
But
Can't give away what she
in a
doesn't
normal circumstance, when would her heirs get her stuff?
When she dies.
She dies.
She died.
Well, what happens when she dies? What happens to this particular property when she dies?
It goes to Michelle.
Back
It goes
to the
away.
Grantor.
It goes away. Does that make sense? So she can't leave that as an inheritance because it's not hers anymore the moment she dies. That's the only one that's not inherited. Every other form of ownership is.
And that's only because it's conventional.
Because it's conventional. Exactly.
Because they're both the same. Okay.
I can't leave something as an inheritance if I don't own it anymore. That's the reason. But you could just, this was one of those things you could just memorize and say, every type of ownership is inheritable except a conventional life estate. Every single one. Now, hopefully, this looks a little better than it did a couple hours ago. How many of you at least have some better idea of it now than you did a couple hours ago?
Yep.
Good. So here's what I want you to do for homework. Ugh, isn't that an ugly word?
Summer break.
In your OneDrive file, you all have the email I sent out, correct? Everybody got the email?
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the email that I sent you, there is a OneDrive link in there. And in that, I just dropped a file in that folder called Ownership Interest Cards. It's a PDF file. And let me do this. Let me unshare here. And I'll show you what it looks like real quickly. Let me get it open over here, and then I'll share it on my screen for you so you can see what it looks like. I think I'm going to share it. Apparently I'm not. Oh, get out of there. I don't want that. There we go. All right, so now I should be able to share. Here and here, share. All right, so what you've got in this little packet here, if I can get out of the stupid, there we go. You have just the 7 different types of ownership. Fee, simple, absolute. Is everybody seeing this share? Just to make sure everybody is, okay? Fee simple, absolute, conventional life estate with a reversionary interest, conventional life estate with a remainder interest, life estate per ultra V with a remainder interest, life estate per ultra V with a reversionary interest, fee simple determinable, and fee simple subject to a condition. That's all 7 of them. And then there are scenarios. Anybody want to take a wild guess how many scenarios there are here?
7.
10.
Oh, 14.
7 of them.
Oh.
What does that tell you? You're going to use each one of those how many times?
One time.
One time. None of them repeat. Each one of these scenarios describes one of the different types of ownership. So what I want you all to do for homework, just as kind of a good review of what we just left off with, because it is something that's heavy information. It's kind of the first real heavy information we've gotten to. What I want you all to do is read through those 7 scenarios and decide which one is which. And we will talk about first thing tomorrow, which is which, and make sure we've got you sorted out on these. Okay, is everybody good on your homework for tonight? Okay, so preparation for tomorrow then would just be to make sure that you are prepared to finish chapter 2 and look at chapter 3. That would be your prep for tomorrow. Other than that, I think that does it for today. And that's it. So somebody, it looks like Seth posted over in the chat. It's about time he did something today.
Whatever.
Did you, by the way, did you send them their book link yet?
Yes, everybody should have their links now. Let us know if you have any issues with that.
Good.
And then also, yes, the review is also in the chat if you guys want to copy that link for today.
Good, good. So he put a review up there from a previous class. Oh
yeah, sorry.
That's on the same topic here. But go through those scenarios for tonight. Has everybody got access to the OneDrive? Are we good there? I want to make sure everybody's got that. Other than that, I think we are good for today. I'm going to put it in the share in the chat window over there. I'm going to put the file. I'm going to drop the file there. Or actually,
I have one last question. Is it possible? Is it a way we can get the vocabulary? Like, is it a way we can print off all the vocabulary from the chapter? Since we don't have like the physical books, because I know in the physical books they're like all in the back of the book. So like,
you know, I don't know what they've allowed as far as printing goes on the ebook. I wish I could answer that. I need to see if I can get access to one to see what I can play with the print. I mean, they just updated them as of July 1. I'm not sure what they're allowing you to print or not, so I'll see if I can get an answer to that, but I don't know.
Because if not, I can just buy the book off Amazon. I just want
the other thing I highly recommend, and I'll show it tomorrow because a couple of people may have checked out for today, something called Quizlet. And some of you may have used Quizlet previously. You may have used it for your kids. You may have, done whatever. But Quizlet is a really good tool that you can use, and I'll give you a link tomorrow where people have gone in and created like vocabulary games with the vocabulary, and I highly recommend you play with something like that as well.
Hey Travis, I'm also gonna throw the Dearborn link in there because somebody just asked me for it.
Okay.
But you don't. I mean, they also were curious to know if the class goes off the book, and typically, yeah, but you're a little bit of a different instructor.
I am, and a lot of my materials are, my own materials, which are a little bit different than potentially the way the book presents them. But we are going in the same order as the textbook for sure.
And you can also take that ISBN number and look it on Amazon if you wanted to.
Yep.
All right.
So most of your the way you're teaching in your slides, most of that will be on the actual national test more than just a lot of the stuff in the book.
I've never seen the test. They don't allow us to see the test, but what I can tell you is, more than a decade worth of experience, and has told me I've got a pretty decent idea of what they're looking for in the test, and so that's what I try to focus on.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to focus it down on. All right. Everybody good?
I have one more question though.
Go for it.
About the water property. This is kind of bothering me. So if you buy a property on Lake Gaston with a beach and you own that, and then somebody did not access the water from your property, but dropped their anchor or put, came in to your property about 10 feet away from your property, your beach, and started playing volleyball games or, swimming. Is there a area that
Are they in the water?
Yes.
Then they're in public waterway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just pulled up the website with the book, and it does let you print.
Yay. There you go.
You can print 2 pages per time or at a time for printing, and it does have the glossary in the back.
Good. So
Nice.
Nice. There you go.
It's also 800 and almost 900 pages, but
yeah, you won't want to print most of that. Quite
no.
honestly.
But it does give the option to print, though. It's at the bottom of the screen.
Good. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for a wonderful first day. Y'all were great. You asked a bunch of questions. I love that. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And we are adjourned until 9 a.m. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Brittany, if that is the license law and rule comments, that is the most important section for the state specific questions. I think Appendix A is the license law and rule comments. I don't remember it by Appendix A. I remember it by the name of the document, which is license law and rule comments. Thanks, Kaylin. You too.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
Cool.
All right. Stop the recording. Yeah.